All right, let's move on to our second informational item, which is the Fall 2021 Benchmark Assessment Results. This was reviewed by our Performance Committee. Dr. Swift.
Thank you, President Lazarus and trustees. We are joined this evening by our partners, Assistant Superintendent Don Linden, and also Research, Assistant Director of Research, Dr. Dan Berger, have joined us on the screen. And I believe Miss Assistant Superintendent Parks is also joining us, and they're going to telegraph her in as well. Trustees, you recall, first of all, there she is. Assistant Superintendent Parks has joined as well. Trustees, you're aware that we are constantly observing our students for how they are doing in their educational experience. What we are sharing this evening, which is required by state law, and we're pleased to do it because we're always watching for how our students are growing and learning. But what you're seeing this evening is simply one snapshot, a single snapshot of the progress that our students have made. This is the Fall 2021 Benchmark Assessment. So in the learning arc of our school year, this is the before picture. And you know, trustees, we do before, we do mid-year, and then we do end of year. So we will continue to be monitoring and observing, and we're delighted to share this starting point data for the 21-22 school year. I do want to point out that although we appreciate the NWEA for what it is, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the evening, this benchmark assessment is but one of many observations that we're conducting every day. Our professional and knowledgeable teachers, there is no more important assessment than the observation of a learned and experienced, committed and caring teacher professional. That's the most important piece of data. We also, they conduct running records, curriculum or unit measures that occur at, particularly at secondary, and all of these are eyes on the progress of our students for the most important reason, which is to adjust our instruction and our supports, particularly coming out of a pandemic, to meet the needs of our students and their learning and development and growth. So this is one point. Our team will share that data this evening. I appreciate the work of the Performance Committee to review it last Wednesday. We had deep and rich discussion. And so we'll do this evening. And then trustees, as we move through the year, Performance Committee is a hard-working committee because they'll be seeing many other metrics as we move through spring also, as well as internal metrics and other observations that we're taking. So with that, I believe Ms. Jazz Parks, Assistant Superintendent of K-12 Schools, is first up. Is that correct, guys? Okay, very good. Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you, Dr. Swift, and good evening, trustees and community. This evening, we are going to review for you the information in relation to our Fall 2021 Benchmark Assessment results. So trustees, I will start out by sharing some key background information for you in our community, and then Ms. Linden will share some context for comparability, and then she will, along with Dr. Dan Berger, review the actual NWEA data analysis pieces of the presentation for you this evening. And then trustees, we will summarize and talk about our plans moving forward. So to talk about some of that key background information that I referenced, Public Act 48, Section 98B legislates that for this 2021-2022 school year, that all public school districts assess all students in grades kindergarten through 8th within the first 9 weeks of this school year, and again before the end of the school year. And these results must be transparently shared and posted to our district's website. Another piece of background information that we want to highlight is that during the 2020-2021 school year, assessments were delivered remotely. And because of that, there was some variation in the level of support students may have received in the home setting. And so as a result, reliable comparisons cannot be made between the fall 2020 assessments that were delivered remotely and any other year when our students were administered the assessments in person at school. This current school year, during the fall of 2021, Ann Arbor Public School students were assessed in person within our school buildings, with obviously the exception of those students who are enrolled in our online programs. So these data will become our baseline moving forward. In the tables that follow, we will compare student performance, which will be referred to as RIT scores by NWEA to grade level means, which are national norms that are calculated by NWEA. Most recently, their recalculation for this was in 2020, and they use a set of over 5 million students across the country to calculate these norms. And Dr. Berger and Ms. Linden will speak more about this when they share the data slides with you. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Linden.
Thank you, Ms. Parks. Appreciate this very much. Good evening, trustees, President Lazarus, and Superintendent Swift. I have the pleasure of sharing a laundry list of context for our comparability. In the slides that come, we're going to show you several tables, and there will be a tendency to want to compare things. And so these caveats become really important because the context is critical. So the first one is when we see the tables, we're going to use caution when we compare across multiple years of a grade level, because we know these are not the same cohort of students, and the students within those cohorts change. So we can look at those trends across grade levels. Certainly they're interesting to take a look at, but they are not the same groups of students. You will see that Dr. Berger has isolated by color the cohorts. And so that's another way to look at roughly the same group of students from year to year. Another important caveat when we try to compare is that beginning in the fall of 2020, we assessed all of our kindergartners on NWEA for the first time. Prior to that time, it was a voluntary assessment, and it was primarily used to monitor students who may need closer monitoring, who we were concerned about, or buildings that made a conscious decision as a grade level team to give the assessment to be able to inform instruction. But it was not required. And so when you see these charts dating back to 17-18, notice that the N count, or the number of students tested, grows exponentially. So it's really not appropriate to compare kindergarten across the grade levels in this way. Another important caveat is that in the NWEA assessment, there is always a drop from second to third grade in student performance. And that's because the platform changes. Up until that point, students in kindergarten, first and second grade have the ability to hear questions and text read aloud to them. When they shift toward the third grade assessment, that capability goes away and students read entirely on their own. So there is a historic drop always from second to third. So we're going to be careful not to try to apply pandemic impact to that kind of a drop when we see it. Another piece that's important is that the patterns that we look at for middle school students, 5th to 6th and 6th to 7th, et cetera, are not going to become apparent until we deliver this assessment multiple times. The first time that we've assessed all middle school students was in 2020. And as Ms. Parks just shared, that assessment took place remotely in student homes, and it was not a controlled environment. And so the data for those assessments cannot be compared. They are not apples to apples. And we'll show you some of the data to demonstrate some rationale behind that. The first year that middle school NWEA took place was in that fall of 2020 in the home setting. So therefore, this fall, in the 2021 school year becomes our first benchmark year for middle school data and our first ability to track fifth graders moving into sixth grade to see how that cohort does. So let's take a look at some data. I know that's a lot to keep in our minds, and we'll review it again together as we go. This first chart is grade level mean. So we're looking at all of our students who tested dating back to the fall of 17-18. The top of this table is mathematics, and the bottom portion is reading. So let's take a look at the top. If you were to look at grade 0, which is kindergarten, you will see that we tested 450 students. That's our N count in the fall of 17-18. And of those 450 students, 56% of those students were at or above grade level, or at or above that nationally normed average or mean. Okay. You will see across grade 0 into fall of 18-19, 19-20, and all the way across that N count begins to grow. And you'll see that our highest number tested were in the fall of this year in person in our schools. And that is the first time we tested all kindergartners in person. So we tested 1,059 kindergartners, and our kindergartners came in this fall at 79% at or above grade level. But it's difficult to compare that number to any previous kinder years. Other caveats that we've shared, I mentioned earlier that Dr. Berger has color-coded these data. So while you can look across multiple grade levels across years, you can also follow cohorts by the color. So when we follow cohorts, it's important to keep in mind that kinder data is difficult to compare because not all kinders were tested. So really, we're going to start with grade 1, and we're going to see how that group of students, which are coded in salmon, did back in the fall of 17-18. Okay, so we'll start in that row. 71.6% of first graders that year came in at or above grade level in the fall. The following fall, as second graders, you'll see that 78% of students were at or above grade level. The following fall, as third graders, you're going to see that drop from second to third grade that we talked about earlier, 78% to 72%. So that's a historic drop. We see that every year. But this is how you'll read this chart, and you can continue through looking at that salmon cohort, roughly the same group of students, some moving in and out, of course, throughout. So that's how we'll read this chart. We'll give you just a moment to take a look at that. And in the next charts that follow, we're going to take a look at similar charts, but we're going to look at students in our 5 focus groups, the groups of students that we are deeply and intensely focused upon being more equitable and better service to. So that will be a rich part of our moving. We will shift now to looking at students in our 5 identified student groups. And we share these data because they're part of our equity commitment in this district. And it's something we all share a deep and urgent commitment to. These data, I just want to caution us while we're comparing and looking at these data, you are going to see Black, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, English learners, and students receiving special education services represented here. Those are the 5 student groups that we have identified as historically underserving in our district. So these data should not be viewed as a disparity of student achievement, but rather a disparity of service and support. So that's an important way to read these data. And it is essentially a part of our district report card of how well we are serving all of our students. So you're looking at the same chart, but now you're seeing those 5 student groups that we are deeply working to improve our service to and working to provide a more equitable education for our students, one that represents our students, honors and celebrates their funds of knowledge, and sees assets that our students are bringing into the environment. So you can see we have a lot of work to do, and the urgency around this work continues, and the need for our focus is great. So what you're looking at here are grades kindergarten, first and second. Those same comparability rules apply. So take a caveat when looking across kinder and patting ourselves on the back too much to see how much our kinders are coming in improved, because remember that this is the first year we've tested really all of our kindergartners. So this is our baseline year for kinder. And if it's all right with trustees, we have 3 charts of this. We're looking at mathematics first. So we have grades kinder first and second. In this next slide, we're looking at grades 3, 4, and 5. And in just a moment, we'll shift to grades 6, 7, and 8. And we'll see that those data really just appear for the past 2 falls. But there are some really stark realities that we want to transparently share and really share our commitment to our families and our students to do better. The same look is available to us in the next 3 slides for reading. So here we'll see grades kinder first and second in the same fashion, only now we're looking at reading scores. And we have grades 3, 4, and 5, and also grades 6, 7, 8 next. Dr. Dan Berger is going to walk us through this next piece because it's an interesting look at how we use NWEA. This is a 30,000 foot view, but teachers also have this view for each of their students.
Yeah, so we've looked at a lot of, the top level data where we're looking at the mean RIT score for a whole subject area, but the NWEA actually breaks things down into strands. So this is just one example of a look that we can use the NWEA data for. And in this case, you can see this is 3rd grade mathematics. And there are 4 strands that are identified by the NWEA for 3rd grade math. There's a geometry, measurement, data, number, and operations, and operations and algebraic thinking. So in this situation, you can see by each strand, these are arranged by year. At the bottom, you have 2017, 18, 19. The dashed line shows you where the pandemic testing break was, and then 2020 and 21. And these are not really meant to figure out exact numbers, but just to give an idea of the overall trends. And if these are broken down into percentiles. So the red is low, 0 to 20th percentile performance. The orange is low average, 21st to 40th percentile. The light greenish gray is average. The kind of mint green is high average, and the other, the dark green is high, so above the 80th percentile performance. And this just kind of, you can get a sense of where we are. The green bar is anything at or above average, and the red and orange is below average. So this is the kind of thing you can look at and say, okay, which strands are we doing better on? Which strands are we not doing as well on? You can look at this for every grade level. I actually have done these for specific buildings, for specific grade levels, so that people can see how they're doing at a, not from the 20,000 foot level, but a little bit closer to what's actually happening at the classroom level. And you can see, interestingly, we had talked about the difference in test administration conditions in the 2020 year. You might note that there's a little dip in the amount of red orange in 2020 on every single one of these. And that happened across a lot of graphs that on the strands at different grade levels, where the students did do a little bit better that year than they did other years for the reasons we've talked about already.
In summary, we just want to highlight again a few details that the NWEA represents but one measure of student performance. It's a benchmark assessment that's required by law to be administered within the first 9 weeks of this school year. And these data will represent our benchmarks moving forward. Historically, as Dr. Berger and Ms. Linden talked about, Ann Arbor Public Schools has underserved students in the 5 identified student groups that were discussed: Black, Hispanic, English language learners, our students who are economically disadvantaged, and our students who receive special education services. And on average, students in these 5 groups are significantly less likely in the Ann Arbor Public Schools to be at or above grade level overall. So in comparing the fall 2016 through 2019 to the fall 2021 results to look at the potential impact of the pandemic on student learning as measured by the NWEA, it reveals that students in kindergarten through fifth grade in reading, we observed that there is a 3% decrease in the likelihood of a student being at or above the grade level mean. And for the students in our 5 groups, there's an additional 3% on top of that of a decrease on average. So a total of about 6% for our students in our 5 identified groups decrease in the likelihood that they are at or above grade level mean in reading. And in mathematics, we observed a 2% decrease on average in the likelihood of a student being at or above the grade level mean. And for students in our 5 identified groups, there was no statistical significant additional impact. And Ms. Linden is going to now talk about a few of our steps moving forward.
So this is our last slide to share, and we appreciate all questions as well. But here's one thing that I think we all took away from this short data walk is that the pandemic has served to highlight the disparities that already existed in our district among our student groups. And in reading, as Ms. Parks just shared, those disparities were exacerbated. They were doubled during the pandemic. So 3% impact on all students, but 6% total on students in our 5 student groups. And so this just reinvigorates us. We are deeply committed. Our urgency remains and our focus remains strong. We are committed to eliminating our inequities. And we're working on this transformation in all areas, culture, practice, and systems. In this second bullet here, it's a very short reference to the work that we are doing on the instructional, the teaching and learning side together with our school leadership teams. And we are really working to shift toward a more equitable instructional model. So we've linked that in here. It's a document that is in its 2.0 phase. Every year we work on adjustments to it. And our work among ourselves, both personally and professionally, is on mindset and pedagogy. And that will be our work for some time until we see that historical data change for us. Pandemic recovery, as we know, is a multi-year process. We know we won't turn things around. We won't see change happen overnight. And these data, as Dr. Swift shared in the beginning of the presentation, they're our new benchmark moving forward. They're an important moment where we say, this is where we began post-pandemic, or we're close to it, we hope. And this is where we see our learning leaps moving forward. So we're excited to come back and share more with this board and with this community in the spring when we deliver this assessment again, and when we share a few other data points that are also important in our monitoring. We just want to share with our community that our strong intervention and our acceleration programs are continuing. So we are working right now on our robust summer opportunities, and we look forward to bringing more detail for those to our board and to our community. But our credit recovery supports, our interventions happening during the school day all the time are ongoing, and our efforts are strong. So
I'll just note before we jump into questions that trustees, as you, I believe, are aware, our March study session will really dive into the learning forward approach. This is the snapshot of our starting place, but we look forward in March at the study session doing the learning focus and then also the social, emotional, mental health. So it's almost like you're getting the data first, and then you're going to get more of the in-depth vision around. So as you said, Trustee Baskett, so what, now what? Can't wait to share that. And we believe in whole child in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, so we'll also be looking at that social, emotional, student, all-around well-being, and some mental health as well.
Great. Because our students aren't just little percentages and dots and numbers. They are human beings, and they have feelings, and we want to make sure that we address the whole child.
That's right.
All right. Thank you very much for that presentation. Let's
Thank you, team.